of Black History Month that this consulate has put together. We are delighted to celebrate this very special month. Each year in the month of February, we get a chance, an opportunity to remember the contribution, courage, sacrifice, and the indelible mark of the African American community in the onward march of this great nation. It is a time to rejoice in the achievements of the past, even as we resolve to not let those ideas which pull us down to engulf our society yet again. It is a time to rejoice and cherish our democratic values, values of equality, values of dignity, and ideas that help us overcome the artificial divides in our society. As we celebrate the Black History Month, it takes me back to my travels to West Africa, to the monuments of Point of No Return in Benin and in Senegal, those shores which people left, pushed by the forces of inhumanity. These people endured extreme hardships and violence. But today, with our togetherness, we have relegated that past and built a world where all are welcome, where all have dignity. This celebration also takes me back to my days in Johannesburg, in the bylanes of downtown Johannesburg, where Nelson Mandela cut his teeth, to the hallowed precincts of Section B of Robben Island, where he was incarcerated for 18 years. As a country, India, we feel proud to be associated with the history of struggle in this country. Whenever we talk of social justice, the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. rings in our minds. And when that happens, we are drawn to those ideas of Mahatma Gandhi which inspired him. Today is a day, this month is a time to recall the contribution and sacrifice of the great heroes of this country, Rosa Parks, Abraham Lincoln, John Lewis, and many more. In 2009, I was fortunate to be associated with the journey of Martin Luther King III when he was retracing the footsteps of his father, Martin Luther King Jr. in India in celebration of that seminal visit in 1959. That trip was a professional engagement for me, but has been captured in my personal memories, ever encouraging and ever inspiring. Today, we are joined by distinguished speakers, Professor Thomas Isekenegbe, President, Bronx Community College, Kuni, Professor Akeel Bilgrami from Columbia University, and Mr. Jacob Ali Wertheimer, grandson of the legendary Muhammad Ali. I'm sure you will enjoy the discussion, and they have much to say about the Black History Month. Let us come together for a better today and for a better tomorrow. Thank you. We'll now have video message from Mr. Eric Adams, President of Brooklyn Borough, to be played.
Hello, I'm Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. I'm honored to have been invited by the esteemed Consul General of India to bring you greetings today in honor of Black History Month. Black History Month is a time to recognize and celebrate the important role of Black individuals in American history. But we also need to acknowledge there is still work to be done in the movement towards racial equality. The struggle for equality is not one that is exclusive to Blacks in the United States. In fact, our friends in India are well familiar. Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are two of history's greatest social justice advocates. They are held in the highest regard by our nations because of the values and principles on which they stood, especially that basic human rights should be a birthright of all and not just a privileged few. We take this time this month to reflect on the contributions that scores of African Americans have made to this country and to the world. Yet we cannot ignore that despite great achievements, there is still work to be done to eradicate discrimination and disparity. For the good of this country and that of the world, this work must be collaborative, focused, and unrelenting. It is from our ancestors, their strength, their convictions, and their courage that we draw strength and a blueprint for our future. Black history is American history, and in large part, it is world history. And like Dr. King implored, if freedom is to ring, the sound of it must be one that resonates around the world for all. Thank you.
We'll now have a short video of Martin Luther King's journey to India.
The person who has influenced my life in terms of action more than anybody is Mahatma Gandhi.
When did you come to Gandhi? I came to Gandhi in the same setting. In theological seminary days, I had heard of Gandhi. But I remembered hearing a message by the president of Howard University, Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who had just returned from India. Spoke in Philadelphia on his trip to India and the whole philosophy of Gandhi and passive and nonviolent resistance. Now, I was so deeply moved by the message that I went away and bought several books on the Gandhian, on Gandhi and Gandhian technique. And at that point, I became deeply influenced by Gandhi. Never realizing that I would live in a situation where it would be useful to me and actually use it.
Let us recognize that violence is not the answer.
he had already been exposed to the teachings of Gandhi, but he came here to learn even more. I come tracing my father and mother's steps, but also following in the steps of Gandhi. It all starts here, which means that this country has a powerful role to play in the world if we are to remain a humane and just society. I believe we will.
It is my honor to welcome Dr. Thomas Isekenegbe, the president of Bronx Community College. He was appointed the 6th president of Bronx Community College in August 2015. Dr. Isekenegbe has an outstanding administrative, teaching and leadership record that spans nearly 30 years at both 2-year and 4-year institutions of higher learning. Dr. Isekenegbe's commitment to student access is immeasurable. Under his leadership, BCC, the Bronx Community College, continues to thrive with the expansion of the Accelerated Study in Associate Program, or ASAP. This program aims to ensure that every student has the opportunity to graduate with a degree in 3 years or less. He is fully committed to creating a community of excellence at BCC, not just for students, but for the entire campus and the surrounding communities. With his efforts, Bronx Community College has received an outstanding student-faculty ratio of 19:1. He has received various awards and recognitions from varied groups in the US and abroad for his services in different areas. Prior to joining BCC, Dr. Isekenegbe was president of Cumberland County College, a community college in Vineland, New Jersey. Dr. Isekenegbe was born in Nigeria, making him the first CUNY president, originally from Africa. And like more than half of the BCC scholars, he was the first in his family to attend college, receiving a bachelor's degree in biology with honors from University of Nigeria and Nsukka. He went on to attend the Indiana State University, where he earned a master's in science education, as well as an ADS and PhD in curriculum and instruction. Dr. Isekenegbe has also been a great supporter of India's engagement with Bronx Community College. He has been a great partner for the Consul General of India in New York. Thank you, Dr. Isekenegbe, for joining us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Deputy Consul General, for those kind words and remarks. In fact, you sort of flattered me by reading all of that. I also want to extend my thanks and appreciation to our Consul General for inviting me to participate in this program today. Really, I think I also want to thank the panelists, Professor Bilgrami, Jacob Ali Wertheimer, and for also participating in today's program. You know, the first thing I want to do is to bring greetings from my faculty, my students, and my staff from Bronx Community College. Really, it's an honor. I'm truly just representing them here. I'm an honor here to be a part of this panel, and I'm really speaking on behalf of my campus, really. So thank you so much for the invitation. I've been with the college for 6 years, and really, when I look back at my success over the last 6 years, I think my connections with the Consulate of India in New York, to me, I think has been one of the most successful things I've done in the last 6 years. We were introduced to the consulate by Shivandu Singh, who is a doctor, and his wife, Paramita Singh, about in 2019. Right, the former Consul General here, they invited us to the consulate. We had a conversation with them. And the rest, you should say, is history, because we've been able to forge a relationship really that exploit our shared values and our shared aspirations between the people of India and between the people of my students here in the Bronx. So really, I think it's an honor for me really here to be part of this panel here. As part of this shared value and aspirations really here, I think the previous Consul General, I think one of the great things he did for us, and he laid the foundation really. If you come to a North Hall library today, there's an Indian section, there's an India corner in our library there with books and materials donated by the consulate from the people of India. Again, I think that's one of the ways we go along in building a shared aspiration and values here. If I give a quick brief history, 98% of my students are students of color, and most of them are first generation students, which means they're the first in their family to go to college. So living in the Bronx, really, it's even just visiting Manhattan is like making a long trip outside the country. So being able to have discussion and conversation with the consulate of India and talking about India, really, it really opens the eyes of our students really here to shared values and aspirations for our people. The video that we just saw a couple of minutes ago of Martin Luther King visiting India is a very inspiring video. And you know what? Our students in 2019 made that trip to India. We had 10 students from BCC, along with other students from other CUNY campuses, as part of our study abroad program that was blessed by the Consulate of India here. They really helped with all of the preparation. We're in India for about 2 weeks. As part of the trip to India, they installed weather stations, they planted trees, and tested water in the lake of power. And using specially designed CUNY backpack weather stations, they monitor climate and pollution in Mumbai and New Delhi. What a way to really talk about shared values and shared aspirations here. To have kids, to have students from the Bronx, and most of them that have never really traveled outside the country, or even really travel out to any other state in the country here, to make their first trip out to India really here. I think it really goes to show that we as one world, we all have the same shared values and the same aspiration really. I remember the reception we gave to the student in the Indian consulate before their trip. We told them that they don't require a visa to really get into that consulate building because that's a really foreign country. Most of them were at awe. And that really reception, they really prepare for the students for the trip. You know, that trip that we made in 2019 was supposed to become an annual trip. Actually, we were going to double the number of students in 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, due to the pandemic, we weren't able to do this. The trip is put on hold. We're hoping that as soon as conditions get back to normal, we're able to reduce that. We're able to continue the trip of sending our students to India during the summer months to learn about the culture and history of India and to see what shared values and aspirations we share together. While the pandemic put the trip on hold, but I'm happy to let you know that despite the pandemic, during the summer, we had a lot of Zoom conference calls between our campus students and different institutions in India. In fact, there were about 4 different calls this summer that talked about issues ranging from sustainable energy to sustainable environment, which I think is important to people in both countries. But I want you to know that our relationship and shared values aspirations are not just limited to science. While our students were in India, they engaged in cross-cultural activities with orphanages and elementary school. And when I talked to the students when they came back, one of the highlights of the trip was a visit to Godam Eco Village project to learn about the concept of environmentalism and co-farming. Most of the students came back really pumped up and really enthused about what they learned from that particular village. I hope some days we say to them, it's not just a question of learning, it's a question of taking the values and the lessons from there and see how you can apply it to your society here in the United States. In fact, this summer, we had Professor Chitan Solanki from the Indian Institute of Technology came to BCC to educate our students about renewable energy and led the solar lamp workshop. The appearance was part of Dr. Solanki's Gandhi's Global Solar to 40 countries in honor of the 50th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's birth. Again, what shared values and aspirations here? How can we keep the world going? How can we sustain the society we currently have and preserve it for our students to come? This theme really touches the shared values and aspirations, really touches about the aspirations of the people of both India, the United States, and particularly where my school is located, the Bronx. We see the bond between BCC and India as one that it's immeasurable and one that can be developed and nurtured and replicated for years. And I can basically sum it up in the lives of 3 human rights that we have on the postcard for this event. Mahatma Gandhi, who had a tremendous influence in the United States on the work of Dr. Martin Luther King and Congressman John Lewis, I think we saw that from the video. John Lewis, who passed away a couple years ago. Dr. King and Lewis openly cited the influence of Gandhi on their philosophies and their life. Dr. King once wrote, Christian doctrine of operating through Gandhi's method of nonviolence was the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom. Not long after the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that segregation of buses in Montgomery, Alabama was unconstitutional, Dr. King said to an audience right here in New York City, Christ showed us the way, Gandhi the Indian showed us how it would work. So you can see between both countries, there's always been this shared value, there's always been shared aspiration, which I think the philosophy of Gandhi has really laid out for us. I think it becomes imperative upon us and our students to really show them how this will work in our society. This particular year in the United States has been very difficult for us, for me, and for my students, with tragedies that can be summed up by the name of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. When I talk to my students, what I say to them, I say, you got to go back and reflect and see on how we can speak out and use the words of Gandhi in leading our different work. Again, this goes back again to reflect on our shared values and aspirations that we both have as a common group. It is a great strength and courage to see all of the variants around them and wanting to use the lessons we can learn from Gandhi and the lessons we can learn from King in moving forward. At Bronx Community College, we practice a very prudent form of nonviolence and passive resistance, something that the men of colors have shown to us and we believe in using our education. Nelson Mandela famously said, education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. We believe that very much at Bronx Community College. We believe this very much in Bronx Community College. Bullets don't change the world, education does. And we were looking forward at our partnership with the Indian Consulate of New York. We can really use this philosophy really to educate our students and to change the world. I am so grateful to the government of India and to the Consulate in New York for the partnership. And I'm hoping that post-pandemic, we will resume our trip. Our students will be able to go back to New Delhi. Our students will be able to go to Mumbai and use education as a tool in which we can all use to achieve between our people shared values and aspirations, not just for our children, but also for our grandchildren and for our great-grandchildren. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate in this morning's program. I appreciate this. And on behalf of our students and faculty.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isekenegbe, for your thoughts and for your leadership at Bronx Community College. Allow me to introduce Dr. Akeel Bilgrami, the Sydney Morgan-Besser Professor of Philosophy at Columbia University. Dr. Bilgrami is also a faculty member of the Committee on Global Thought. He got his first degree in English literature from Bombay University, but defected to philosophy. I think that was a good defection because he found the English literature too hard. He went to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, and there he got another bachelor's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. He has a PhD from the University of Chicago after writing a dissertation, Meaning as Invariance, on the subject of indeterminacy of translation and issues concerning realism and linguistic meaning. He joined the department in 1985 after spending 2 years as an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Professor Bilgrami has two relatively independent sets of intellectual interests in the philosophy of mind and language and in political philosophy and moral psychology, especially as they surface in politics, political economy, history, and culture. He has published a book in 1992 called Belief and Meaning, and another book in 2006 called Self-Knowledge and Resentment. He is presently working on a book on the relations between value, agency, and practical reason. Dr. Bilgrami teaches courses and seminars regularly in the Department on Philosophy of Mind and Language, as well as moral psychology, metaethics, and political philosophy. He also teaches seminars in the Committee on Global Thought, the Religion Department, and in political science on politics and rationality, as well as on a range of issues from questions of secularism and identity to the effects of globalization on politics and political thought. He was the chairman of the philosophy department from 94 to 98, the director of Hyman Center for the Humanities at the Columbia University from 2004 to 11, and the director of the South Asian Institute from 2013 to 16. We cannot have a better speaker than Professor Bilgrami to speak on shared values and shared aspirations, celebrating the Black History Month. Dr. Bilgrami, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for inviting me, Council General, for a very nice occasion. I think it's extremely important for the African American people in this country and for the people of India to come together to reflect on their common problems and possible solutions to their problems together. And I'd like to say a couple of things. One of them is, of course, what the Consul General began with, which is the relationship between Martin Luther King and Gandhi. It's widely known that King was much influenced by Gandhi. And the main thing, I think, apart from the commitment to nonviolence, the main thing that brings them together is, I think, the importance of movements in politics, of the importance of popular movements in politics. Both Gandhi and Martin Luther King at some point began to show skepticism about the state being willing to do things for its people unless it was made to do so by movements. In fact, all the major transformations for the better in American society in the last 100 years have come as a result of movements making the state make reforms. So the labor reforms of the 1930s came because of labor movements, which Franklin Roosevelt responded to. The civil rights legislation, it's a remarkable legislation in the 60s, came as a result of Martin Luther King's movements. And of course, Indian independence was won because of the popular mobilizations by Gandhi. So both of them shared a skepticism that the state would do any fundamental transformation for the good. I mean, it may make marginal changes on its own, but it wouldn't make major changes or fundamental changes unless movements made the state do it. And this was a view that was shared by King and Gandhi. And as we know, that King first in Albany and then through the Birmingham letter and the Birmingham mobilizations, and then ending up with Selma mobilizations, increasingly applied Gandhian strategies to the movements with greater and greater effectiveness and greater success until Lyndon Johnson simply had to accept that the civil rights was an inevitability, and the power of movements in making leaders in the Washington establishment realize that is extremely important to understand. And I think this comes from Gandhi, because Gandhi was a mobilizer of people who had no precedent. I mean, much before there was any widespread media publicity, he managed to mobilize people by the sheer power of his personality and his leadership. I mean, can you imagine somebody who tells 8 people around him that he's going to go on a march, on a walk to the sea, hundreds of miles away? He just tells 8 people and starts walking. And by the time he gets to the sea, there are literally thousands of people with him. I mean, that is an absolutely remarkable achievement before you could have any publicity for movements and so on and so forth. So, and these are the inspirations that Martin Luther King uh, 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 that influenced Martin Luther King, and I think we have to see in the future how we can use the power of popular sentiment and mobilization for pursuing change of this kind. Of course, it must be nonviolent, as King and Gandhi said, and because any insurgent violent movements are always unsuccessful, and they just create a great deal of more state violence, as we know from the case of both the Nat Turner insurgency and the John Brown insurgency in this country. I want to end with another point, which I don't have any answer to, but I think is very well worth thinking about. And I'd like to just raise it for people, and that is, you see, a great deal of the liberation of slaves in African American history, in Black history, was, of course, made possible by the moral arguments that you find in people like great figures like Lincoln, but even the more radical Republicans than Lincoln, and of course the abolitionists. So there were a great deal of moral arguments for that liberation of the enslaved Negro people. But at the same time, it was inevitable that there would be a liberation of the Black people, because economic conditions made it clear that plantation economies were no longer possible with the increase in industrialization. So tobacco, cotton, and so on, which were the source of which were the reason for enslaving people for free labor, plantation agriculture was passing away and industry was emerging in the middle of the 19th century. And so there were all these economic arguments. The economy made the liberation of people inevitable, liberation of slaves inevitable, because you needed a new form of labor, which is wage labor. And you didn't need slavery because it was no longer plantation economy. So the question I'd like to leave you with is something worth thinking about, which is, on the one hand, there is the inevitability of certain changes because of economic changes. And on the other hand, there are moral arguments that move people to change. And I think it's very important for us, if we want change in the future, to work at both these levels, to both think about the economic grounds for change, as well as the moral grounds for change, which move people and their minds and mobilize them. And so that this combination of changing institutions, economic conditions, economic institutions, and morally moving people have to be integrated together, and that will be the most effective and fundamental source of change. And this is something we have learned from the history of Blacks and African Americans in this country extremely well, and the work of Gandhi, which is, I think, very similar to some of the problems and changes that have occurred in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bilgrami. That was very thoughtful. We now invite Mr. Jacob Ali Wertheimer, a voice of the youth. He is an activist, athlete, and student at Harvard University, where he studies African American studies and government. He is writing a thesis under the guidance of Cornel West, and he is also competing for the men's track and field team. Jacob has been raised in the humanitarian world, carrying on his grandfather, the legendary Muhammad Ali's legacy, building a school, delivering medical supplies and rebuilding a hospital at a young age in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the past year alone, he has spoken out against white supremacy, police brutality, mass incarceration, structural racism, and more here in America on networks such as CNN and ESPN. Jacob, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you all. I want to first thank the Consul General for providing me with the opportunity to not just speak with you all today, but to share and connect as we discuss Black History Month and the Black tradition. I would like to begin today with a quote by the great African-American author James Baldwin, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Let us use today to not only remember the challenges that were faced in the past, but to ignite change, to take today to face challenge itself, and to use today to take further steps towards being the change that we'd like to see. The legacy of hatred, racism, white supremacy, and more has existed on this land for over 400 years as slaves first arrived in 1619. And something today I would like to speak about is how white supremacy in this country is not to be thought of as disjointed parts. Slavery, the era of Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws, and the modern era of mass incarceration, but as a continuum, that throughout history, the legacy of white supremacy evolves into new forms. But I hope that after 400 years, this nation as a whole can finally come to the conclusion that enough is enough. I'm tired of seeing my people killed in the streets for the world to see. I'm tired of seeing the conditions with which we are subjected to. I'm tired of seeing us thrown in prison and demoted to being second-class citizens. And most importantly of all, to quote the great civil rights leader, Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. As a student at Harvard University and as the grandson of Muhammad Ali, I've been blessed to be supported and educated and offered the opportunity to learn about the tradition of social justice and civil rights, and to speak on it as well as I am here before you all today. Growing up, my grandfather gifted me with an understanding of the beauty of my heritage and lineage, that despite what the world tries to tell us, we are beautiful, we are great, that despite the struggle we face, we must persevere as we continue to show our beauty to the world. Something I want to share with you all from the bottom of my heart is that this fight that we are honoring today is a fight for all of us. As Martin Luther King said, instances of injustice anywhere, whether that be in India or America, may I say, are a threat to justice everywhere. The fight for justice is not my fight or your fight, but it is our fight to dismantle the legacy and structure of white supremacy in this world. It is not enough to sit by and just watch, but we must all play our part. It is not enough to be not racist, but we must be anti-racist, opposed to the racism that exists and actively fighting against it. To quote the great Black scholar W.B. Du Bois, the first African-American to graduate with a PhD from my university, Harvard, one cannot be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Black people are lynched, murdered, and starved. That suffering continues to this day. We all see it. We all here have spoken about it. One cannot sit at the sidelines while Black people, Indian people, any people are suffering. My grandfather once said, "Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." I know that this is a quote that I have lived with and lived by my entire life. And I hope that we can live as my grandfather would have wanted us to in his memory. That we can live a life full of service to others, a life dedicated to fighting against and ending injustice, a dedication to paying our rent here on earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. That was very relevant. We have been joined by community leaders. Some community leaders have joined us on Zoom as well. We have Mr. Nair from New York. Mr. Sivasan Nair, would you like to put a question or comment?
Yes, sure. Thank you for inviting me for this room, and I am so glad our Consulate General and DCG is conducting this kind of program for celebrating Black Month history. And my question, anyone can answer. Indians and Black Americans have a great deal of commonalities. We know Dr. Martin Luther King visited Mahatma Gandhi and adopted nonviolence movement in America. and it was successful. What are the different ways we can adopt to have that mutual trust and respect each other for our common causes and survival?
Dr. Bilgrami, may I invite you to take that question? Unmute कीजिए.
Yes, that's an excellent question, and it's really what we've been discussing this last several minutes. The question of mutual trust is something that is has to be amongst people. Trust is always amongst people. Trust is not an idea that applies to institutions. Institutions don't have a psychology. They in the way that people do. And I think mutual trust is an extremely important ideal to seek, and it's really the basis of nonviolence. That is, it's only when trust breaks down that violence emerges. And I think Gandhi's point was that it is always possible. Everybody trusts each other in many situations. We trust our neighbors, we trust our family members, trust is very prevalent in many everyday situations in everybody's lives. The question is, when it gets more and more into the public domain, trust tends to break down because there's just too much impersonalities. There's not enough personal relations. And then when it's distanced in that way, disengaged because of larger and larger societies and mediated by institutions, trust does break down. And I think what one has to learn is what one naturally give to each other in everyday personal relations. How do we scale that up and bring it to more public and institutional locations? I think that is the big question that is being raised by Mr. Nair.
Consul General also has a question.
Yeah, Professor Thomas, a question for you. You are from Nigeria. When we celebrate Black history here in America, and I guess in several other parts in Canada and UK, but if you were to talk about Black History Month in Nigeria or in any other African country, what sort of response would that evoke, or what sort of thought would that evoke?
I think I came into the United States in 1981, and I think the idea of it, I don't think most people, because of the homogeneity of we're all Africans and we all people of the same culture, I don't think people really think about it. But the more I've been here for a long time, the more I see the history, I see the contribution of people to the culture and the society here. I think it becomes very important that in as much as we have different groups living in this country here, we got to celebrate the achievement and the contribution of each one. I think in most African countries, they don't really see it or take it seriously, but in a society in which we live here, I think it's really important. Muhammad Ali, John Lewis, Martin Luther King, these are names and heroes that really contributed to the advancement of our society. I like for my children to know about them. I like for my grandchildren to know about them. So I think it really becomes important here. In as much we have our different cultural identities, but we must celebrate those people that brought us where we are today. I think it's very important. And I just want to add to the last questions earlier on. How do you build trust and relationship between the different groups? I think the key is here is education, from what Nancy Mandela said. The type of work that we're doing with the consulate in India, the people in the Bronx that have never left the Bronx, there's the ignorance there because they don't know what the Indian people are or what the other groups that they don't know look like. But through using education as a vehicle, as a tool, we're able to bring people together, see the common shared values and aspirations that we all have. I can tell you, my students came back from India liberated. They were surprised about the food, about the people they met along the way, about the people that they talked to. I wish I could organize such more trips for the students from the Bronx to travel out. At the end of the day, you find we all have one humanity. I think it's ignorance and fear that sort of divide us and separate us.
Wonderful. No, thank you. It feeds into what you said and feed into what Professor Bilgrami said about mutual trust, meeting people, understanding each other, and thereafter taking their associations forward. Now, can you also, for our viewers and for our audience, can you also, Professor Thomas, spotlight a bit, when you're in Africa, you hear a lot about African Renaissance. Thought leaders like Thabo Mbeki and others really, championed that cause of African Renaissance. You go to various parts of Africa, you go to Senegal, for example, in the middle of the sea, there is a huge statue which signifies the strength of African Renaissance. The values that that continent has championed and led the world in. So, just for our younger audience, it'll be nice if you can throw a little light on the contours of African Renaissance.
Africa is one of those countries that is not really well known by a lot of people. You're right. I happen to have been in Senegal. I know the statues you're talking about. I've been to the point of no return there. I've been to the island of Gorée. I think it's really important that for people here abroad and other countries to realize that Africa is a very, very rich continent in both history and in both culture. And I think what is unfortunate is that is the negative portrayal in the media by various media groups about, yes, are the negative things coming out of Africa, yes. But I think what the media has highlighted most are some of those negative things instead of the very positive things that you're talking about. I think this is where it becomes important again in our history, in the way we teach our children, in the way we educate people. We need to highlight some of the cultural things, the things of value that are coming out of the continent. I think those are things that are not being done. And it's my hope and expectation that as we move forward, that we'll focus more on the positive instead of negative things that are coming out of Africa.
Thank you. One more question I have for Professor Bilgrami. Professor, you talked of on a very strong moral fundamental, moral imperative, a moral force that lay behind the mobilization which Mahatma Gandhi led or the mobilization that Martin Luther King led. Now, you also talked about an economic imperative as well as the moral imperative, the both two go together for making a change. Now, in today's world, we have other tools of mobilization which are being used. Technology is a big mobilizer, so is social media. So on a subject like climate change, for example, we have huge mobilization across the world. And there is an understanding that one must do this or one must do that. But at the same time, possibly the deeper connect of mobilization which comes from the moral force seems to be missing. So, I would just and not only that, missing is one thing, is just a fact, but what does it talk about the society and where is our society headed in the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years?
Yeah, so I agree with you that the new technologies have changed things enormously. It's just very different from the time that Gandhi and even King. And technology is a neutral thing. You can have good uses for it and bad uses for it. I mean, technology itself is completely neutral. It's up to us to use it. I believe that the whole informational technology and the internet, one thing that it has been remarkable, I think, for the good, is that it has, for me, I've come to realize that human beings possess a trait. Only because of this technology, I've come to realize that human beings possess a trait which I never knew we had until this technology. And that is, I don't know how to describe it. The only way I can put it is that it's a kind of cognitive generosity. A cognitive generosity. I don't mean material generosity. Somebody who's not given a penny to Oxfam will put every little thing he knows on the internet to share it with other people. Every little thing. He's found a way to remove ink stains from his clothes. He lets people know about it on the internet. He's had a delicious biryani. He gives people the recipe on the internet. It's just pouring out of people to share the knowledges they have. And even if they're not materially generous, this has brought out a cognitive generosity, which no technology before could have done. Only this could have done. So they're good people. But then, of course, as we also know, it mobilized people to do very bad things, as we know from what happened in January. And so the technology itself is neutral, and it's we who have to use it in good ways or bad ways. And for that, you've got to blame us or praise us.
Thank you.
I have a question to Jacob Ali Wertheimer. Jacob, you spoke about divisions, you spoke about discrimination, racism, but do you also feel that now there is a better realization among the youth, with people like you coming up and saying that this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, and probably a greater effort to reduce those divisions and to fight that discrimination? Do you feel that this is a new movement taking place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this past year certainly showed that there's a lot of change going on. As my generation and older, we're starting to get the sense that, we're coming into our own, we're becoming adults in this world, and that it is our turn, it is our time to start making change, to start fighting, to start doing what we think is right as the world becomes ours and becomes our own. And I certainly have faith that in my generation, there's a much larger movement of people who are socially conscious, socially aware, and who really care about the issues that exist in this country, and that have seen and had the fortune of knowing history and understanding everything that comes before us, and seeing all the great people who have come before us and all the work that they've done, and understanding that we want to make sure that that job gets finished, that we want to build on that work and not let it go to waste, and that enough is enough, and that hopefully we can finally make the change that this nation has needed for so long.
Wonderful. On that positive note, may I invite the Consul General to make his closing remarks?
Well, thank you very much. We've had a very enriching discussion, and I would say we've all been left with many questions to ponder over. While we sat down today together with so many of our viewers and audience to celebrate the Black History Month, but I must say, we talked of sports, we've talked of Muhammad Ali, we've talked of Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, all great leaders of movements, of technology, of cognitive, very interesting expression you gave, Professor Bilgrami, cognitive generosity. We've also talked of African Renaissance, we've talked of diplomatic engagement between India and the United States, between Bronx Community College and student community in India. And that is the spirit of Black history. The spirit of universalism, the spirit, it may be true for any other country. What we've talked today is relevant to each and every corner of the world. And in that sense, we are truly here. We've celebrated the spirit of Black history. We've talked of the past, we've talked of the present, and as much of the future. I'm sure in the days ahead, we'll see greater amplification of the values of Black history, and we'll all do our best to cross over to the better side of humanity and to create a better humanity. So with that, gentlemen, may I thank you once again from the bottom of our heart, and a very warm thank you from the consulate to Dr. Thomas Isekenegbe, to Professor Akeel Bilgrami, to Mr. Jacob Ali Wertheimer, and our friends Mr. Sivdasan Nair and Madam Malini Shah, who we see on the screen, as also all the young minds and others who have joined today to celebrate Black History Month. We hope that we will continue this association, and we hope through the student and youth engagement that we have at Bronx Community College, we'll see greater flow or greater cross flow of ideas of Black history here and the ideas of India in India, and hope the two shall meet at the highest point and we shall celebrate ourselves. So thank you very much once again, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. It is indeed a pleasure for us. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.